Hello and welcome to Mind Shifters Radio. I'm Tim Hayes. I'm your host for the first hour. And today is Tuesday, June 3rd, 2025. As always, we're grateful to everyone who's joining us here today, whether you're listening live or through the archives, as we spend another couple of hours teaching and supporting people in using some of the most powerful, effective, efficient, and accessible tools I've ever encountered. These tools are available absolutely free through the tireless efforts of Dr. Michael and Jeannie Ryce on the website at whyagain.org. If you go to that website and click on the two words that say Start Here in the upper left-hand corner, it will take you to a page where you can download and read Chapter 24 of Dr. Michael Ryce's book. His book is titled, Why Is This Happening to Me Again? And that chapter of the book contains a narrative description and explanation of the primary tool in this work. That tool is called the Reality Management Worksheet, sometimes called the Reality Management Wake-Up Sheet. And it's a tool I've been using to great effect for over 20 years now to improve the quality of my life and most of my relationships, and to turn any negative emotional experience I have into part of the infallible guidance system that each and every one of us has been given. You can also download the actual worksheet process itself. It's a simple PDF file. Click the link, download it, print it off, copy as often as you'd like, and use it over and over again, absolutely free. You can also download a whole host of audio files of shows just like this one where people have been stepped through that worksheet process, and if you choose to listen to them, even repeatedly, they can serve as a powerful tutorial for you to help you get maximum benefit from these tools in the shortest amount of time possible. You can also go to your app store and type in the three words Heartland Aramaic Forgiveness. And if you choose to do that before you're done typing the word forgiveness, you'll see the glowing heart icon. If you tap on that, it will let you download a completely free and private app that contains the Reality Management Worksheet. It contains an abbreviated version of that worksheet process, and it contains a copy of the Dragon Klingon game, which is a wonderful way to introduce these tools to even younger audiences. And we hope people do all of that soon and often, primarily because it tends to improve the quality of people's lives the more they actively apply these tools in their lives. And secondarily, because it tends to prompt comments, questions, answers, and testimonials. If you have any of those to share with us, we would greatly appreciate you doing so. You can email me at tjh@mindshifters-academy.org, and or you can email Jeannie at jeanie@whyagain.org. That's whyagain.org. And if we get a question or a comment from you, we'll address it on the internet show, and then as time allows, send you a notification about what day and time that occurred so you can listen back to the archives for your feedback or input. And the other option is that you join us live. And if you join us live, we're here from 11 to noon Central Time, Monday through Friday, most weeks. And all you need to do is get one of the Zoom phone numbers and then dial that number and add our meeting ID. Our meeting ID is 853-2357-4173. That's 853-2357-4173. And you can also just open up Zoom in a web browser and add that meeting ID number and join us live. If you join through the phone, then you will be automatically muted, and the way to unmute yourself to ask a question or participate is *6, and that's a toggle. You can toggle in and out of that. So we're grateful to have you here. Thank you for joining us, and please understand that we are actively inviting participation, even if I seem to be in the middle of talking about something or on a monologue. What we have discovered over the years is that the more we get questions and comments from people just like you, the better the shows get. And the more value people find in them, the more often people ask us, make that a highlight show, that best of show, so it's easier for me to find because I want to listen to that again. So feel free to grace us with your auditory presence and or your visual presence if that's something you choose to do through the Zoom app. And let us know how these things are landing for you. Recently, we began reading through the question and answer section, the third section of the book by Christian Sundberg. His book is titled A Walk in the Physical. And the first two sections we've done most of. The second section is a compilation of 160 essays. And the third section that we've just begun is prefaced by Christian saying two things I want you to understand. We're going to be talking about things here that words can't really describe. So we're going to be just mumbling, babbling words, trying to point towards an experience that people can have if they live in the question, if they open themselves up to new experience, if they're not living from dogma or belief. But the words we're speaking are not the truth. They're just kind of hinting at the truth. The truth is something you have to live for yourself and be in direct connection or contact with how the world actually works. And the second thing you want us to know before we start talking about these questions and answers is, and I'll just quote him here, I am a fool, and I certainly do not claim to have all the answers. Far, far from it. I am a flawed and largely ignorant student of life. I'm also learning and changing my understanding every day, as we all are. And still, fools can help fools, so I present this content just for consideration in the hopes that it may be of assistance to someone. And if I were writing that, I would have said something like, in the hopes that it will stir up different questions for you to consider. And the last section we were reading on is God. Is God real? What is God? Is God a light, a man, a force, an energy? What is he? They're using the male pronoun in that question. Does the capital S source or God have a personality? If so, what are the characteristics of the personality? So we're reading from these yesterday. And the essence of the answers he gives to those questions is that what's most likely is that God or light or love or all that is, most likely it's a mistake to attribute human qualities and characteristics, brain functioning, emotions, etc., to whatever it is that gave rise to this existence. Just like it's really a mistake to give human characteristics to consciousness itself, to the ability to observe, because all of the human characteristics that we think about all of the emotions, the anger, the fear, the hurt, the frustration, the confusion, the joy, all of those things are qualities of energy or patterns that we can step back and observe. So they can't be the truth of what we are. I keep thinking about An Impersonal Life, a book by Joseph S. Benner, and the idea in there that there's ancient wisdom that says the Creator makes the rain fall on the good and the evil, and the sun just shines and the rain just falls. It's not like the rain is a gift that we only give to people when they've earned it, and that the energy of life in creation is only for the good-hearted people, and we're going to withdraw it from the bad-hearted people. So the whole idea of judgment is human in nature. And so again, it's probably a mistake to attribute human qualities and characteristics to whatever it is that's vast and pervasive and powerful enough to create all of existence as we know it in that physical realm. And then the next question in line here is God's or Source's love, is it personal or impersonal? And Christian's answer is it's both. You are personally known and completely cherished, celebrated, and adored. And simultaneously, Source's love is vast and it forms the bedrock of all existence. The next question is, who created God? How did God come into existence? And Christian writes in the way of an answer, because we currently live in a world of duality and linear time, and because that's all we typically remember as long as we're human, the human mind believes that duality and linear time are the fundamental truth of life. So it assumes that all things, even ideas like, quote, God, close quotes, can fit into that understanding. Fact is, they can't. We assume everything has a beginning and an end like our world, but that is not the case. In fact, duality and linear time are not fundamental. By that he means they're not essentially deeply true. He writes, they arise within that which is fundamental. The questioner, parentheses, naturally but incorrectly, close parentheses, the questioner trying to take his or her locally earned virtual constraints and trying to impose them upon that which gives rise to the entire local experience, it just doesn't work. That which is needs no cause. It simply is that which exists. This may not satisfy the human intellect because the human intellect is trying to fit everything into its, quote, logic or local, close quotes, assumption set so that it can understand it, so that it can understand its form-based thinking. But remember, your intellect has been shoved full of words, rules, laws, understandings, observations, past experiences, and your intellect was programmed in this physical realm in the restraint set of linear time and duality and physicality. So your mind is trying to make sense of things given, or your intellect, I should say, to be clear about it. That would be the same as what Dr. Michael Ryce calls your 9-bit mind, right? This hard drive of a part of your brain that can only record what's been poured into it and then spit it back out. That part of your mind is trying to apply its rules of logic and understanding, and by when I say it's, I mean the rules of logic and understanding that have been programmed into it, that part of your mind is trying to apply those rules and logical understandings to everything because that's all it has. So because we live in this world of duality and linear time, and that's all we typically remember as long as we're still in the body, we assume that all things function the way our experience of life is here in the physical. He says, duality and linear time are not the fundamental truth of life. They arise within that which is fundamental. And this is probably not going to satisfy you if you're listening to this with a conscious logical mind, because that conscious logical mind is an intellect that just can churn what already has been poured into it. This is why Dr. Michael Ryce says to find solutions to these things, your mental emotional problems, your spiritual conundrums, etc., you must be out of your mind. Because without realizing it, it's very, very similar to what Dr. Michael Ryce says is almost exactly the same as what David Bohm talked about and Krishnamurti talked about. There's a fundamental flaw in the process of human thought when it comes to emotions and relationships. And so you got to step out of that process of that circular thought, what Guy Finley calls the mechanical level of mind, what David Bohm and Krishnamurti would title sustained incoherence. And so your conscious logical mind is not going to be satisfied with this answer about how did God come into being and who created God, etc., because it's not something that can be known from that conscious logical level. So then Christian writes, but indeed the entire world of form and duality and everything that exists within that which fully transcends it. And that thing that transcends all the areas of levels of form has no beginning and requires no beginning. And your mind is going to go, wait a minute, how could that make sense? It doesn't make sense in the realm of the physical and to the conscious logical mind. However, and so that's how we give rise to superstition and magic and miracles. And, you know, in one of his talks years ago, I heard Guy Finley say something like, you know, a miracle is simply an order of reality that we weren't aware of until we became aware of it. But it's just the truth that's always been there. And there's a very similar interpretation in The Way of Mastery and, of course, in Miracles about what is a miracle. It's just, if it's happening, it's all just a part of the flow of life. But if you're living in a mind that doesn't think that could possibly happen, or if you're living in a mind that, for instance, believes that you're just nothing other than your physical body, and that if the things of the world can't register in your taste, smell, sight, sound, or touch, in your five senses, that if it doesn't register on your five senses, it's not real. If you're living in that kind of a mental illusion, then a lot of things look like a miracle. There's all kinds of writings about how to the less well-educated mind, or you might call a primitive mind, that which looks like science to the more advanced or the better educated looks like a miracle or magic to those that aren't educated. So the fact of the matter is, we're trying to make sense of things that go way beyond our ability to make sense of them, because that's part of what our mind does. And our mind does that in a way at the physical level, it makes very good sense for survival. The body's hungry, how do I put nutrients in it? The body's thirsty, how do I get it healthy fluids? The body's tired, how do I get it to rest? The body's got pain in one part, how do I relieve that pain and heal whatever caused it? These things make sense. That's what the mind does. That's what the mind at the conscious logical level or the intellectual level does. And it's very, very good at that. However, that's not a tool. That logical tool is not a tool that's appropriate for understanding what is the nature of life, what is God, how did creation come into be, are there other worlds of experience, are there other levels of existence? That conscious logical mind can't go there or can't expand enough ever to encompass that which goes way beyond it and way beyond the physical. Good news is you're not bound just to your conscious logical mind. You've got insight, intuition. You can tap into wisdom that goes way beyond the physical senses. And that's part of what a lot of these spiritual teachings are trying to gear us up towards, to expand our natural abilities in areas other than just those tied to the five physical senses. Like David E. Martin in his book Lizards Eat Butterflies, where he alludes to the fact that, hey, you've got 12 cranial nerves, and there's one cranial nerve for each of your five senses. Doesn't it kind of make sense that there might be other senses for the other 7 cranial nerves? Other energies, other levels of existence that can register through this system that we call the physical? And what would it look like if we did exercises like Dr. Michael Ryce is talking about doing an intuitive development seminar, workshop, a 9-day intensive? What's that about? That's about developing your ability to tap into another aspect of your existence and your mind that is not taught in our world of traditional education and the physical senses and how to be a good consumer and how to be on one side or the other of some political debate. There's a whole, and some would say a whole range of other abilities from, the energy of the Kundalini and the Chi and insight, intuition, etc., inspiration. And we are not taught about them, and we are not taught ways to practice our strengthening our ability to access them. So the next question here that he poses is, or that he's received and that he's trying to respond to, the question is God simply the collective consciousness of all individual beings, or is God a separate, self-aware entity capable of existing apart from those individual beings? If God is only the collective consciousness of all individuals, then who is the creator and who is the creation? Now, please just note in the form of the question that it's either or. It's all or none. It's just like saying, isn't it wrong to let people who've had a physical change in their body's outward signs of gender, isn't it wrong to let them compete against other people in sports? Just give me an answer, yes or no. What is a woman? We've had these people who have these questions. So what's the definition of a woman? And our mind and our culture and our language wants it to just be spelled out categorically, simply, or dichotomously, one side or the other. There's no gray area. And the fact of the matter is, that's the way these questions are posed. But it doesn't mean that's the way actuality unfolds or life expresses. So here's Christian's answer to this question. Anytime we talk about this, we are immediately going to fall short because language and ideas come from form. And God, or all that is, or the flow of life, or source, whatever you want to call it, transcends all form. Also, that means when we say things about God, they may sound paradoxical when they aren't. One of my favorite lines about this came across years ago, and it might have been as we were deep diving into A Course of Love or the Course in Miracles or the Way of Mastery, but the essence of this perspective says that whenever you believe you have found a paradox, something that contradicts actuality of life, be assured in that moment that you're only seeing part of the picture. Because when you see the whole picture, when you see all there is, when you experience all there is to experience, everything will make perfect sense. It's like the Glennon Doyle writing when she wrote, you know, Pure Love. Tell me what I should learn today. And it writes to her about forgiveness. And she's basically channeling these information, these ideas about forgiveness. And forgiveness is just a bigger, broader picture and a bigger perspective. And unconditional love itself, the source of all life itself, sees it all. And from that bigger perspective, everything makes sense. So when you're looking at something and it seems like this is a true paradox, just understand there is no such thing as a paradox. There's the flow of life. And life is always flowing and expanding, and it makes sense. It doesn't always make sense to the human mind that's trying to catalog it and crunch it down to these few bits of information that can make sense to it based on its language and its thought structure, but that doesn't mean it doesn't make sense in a bigger picture. So then Christian goes on and he responds by saying, regarding your question, is God simply the collective consciousness of all individual beings, or is God a separate, self-aware entity capable of existing apart from those beings? Regarding that, Christian says, God is both separate and not separate. Nothing is truly separate. God is both all the drops in the ocean and the ocean itself, which is far more than any collection of drops. In other words, the ocean is more than the sum of its parts. This is difficult for us to understand because we think in terms of matter and components, and we expect spirit to break down discretely like that, but it doesn't. Spirit gives rise to matter, not the other way around. And there are some hard physical scientists these days that will argue that until the cows come home. And Eben Alexander was one of them. As a neurosurgeon, he was absolutely convinced that his consciousness in him and everybody else was just the byproduct of random neural firings. Until his brain went offline and he was clinically brain dead for days, and he had this rich, deep experience, which he writes about in his book, Proof of Heaven. Spirit gives rise to matter, not the other way around. And then Christian writes, regarding the question, quote, who is the creator and who is the creation? Is there even a creator? Close quotes. Christian writes, beingness just is. It doesn't need a creator. The idea of creation, which requires a beginning, only exists as the idea is considered by a character, a human being, who is in a linear time system where linear time is assumed to be fundamental, whereas in fact, linear time is not fundamental. Philosophers, scientists, theologians for years have looked at this and said, look, the essence of our experience of time is created in thought. And you can do these your own experiments, your own observations with this anytime you want. Pay attention to how at sometimes when you're engaged in certain activities, time seems to stretch forever and never end. And at other times you're engaged in other activities and it seems to race by in a heartbeat, but it was several hours. You've completely lost track of time. Well, if time were simply the same as your body that's measurable or a distance from here to the next town, it wouldn't be that you could have an experience of existing without it. So time is a product of the concepts of thought. And because we're here in a physical body and our thoughts have been programmed with these languages and these concepts of time and what we call the laws of physics, etc., we think everything that begins in time ends in time. We think that's all there is. We think that it doesn't make any sense to say that a person is both or a creator is both separate and not separate. But that's only because of the limitations of our process in thought. Christian writes, in other words, because we deeply believe in linear time, we assume things need to be created and start somewhere in time, like they do in our reality system. But that assumption is not correct. Linear time is a creation of thought, and it arises from beingness, not the other way around. So we're about the halfway mark in this hour. I just want to extend the invitation again to unmute and speak up if you've got any kind of a question for us and or a comment. The next question here is, I'm afraid of offending God. How can I avoid offending God? I love laughing about this question.
Dr. Tim.
Yes.
You're on to, I was reading a book last night and I thought maybe God, if we think about God, it's like a placebo. If we just say prayers and maybe it's a placebo and there's nothing really there in the way that we think it's there. It might be there in a way we have no idea of. I probably shouldn't have unmuted myself, but you've got me.
Well, let's just stick with what you just said. It's instead of the word might, when you said it might be there but not in the way we're thinking of, just take the word might out of there. It's there, just not in the way we're thinking of it. It's not limited to our thoughts about it. Think of yourself as you're dealing with a kindergarten kid, and you're the parent or grandparent in that family. And this is a bright, sensitive kid, and they ask you a question about what is love and what is marriage and what is the meaning of life. And there's nothing you can say that can communicate to that kindergartner anything about the richness of life that you've lived through and you've come to know. Well, we are like that when we're kindergarten age kids, but we're also like that when we're elders. The problem is, or the difficulty is when we get to the level of an elder and we don't realize that we still don't know anything. And we think we know stuff and we go out and we're going to try and pound it into people, and we're going to get them to believe that what we think is truth, and that's how we create all of the violence and separation. However, the act of the living in the question allows the space for us to grow and expand. But what we say God is can't ever be what God is.
Right.
Why? Because language was created long after there was consciousness and physical bodies. So the thing we're using, this thing we call language, the words, the concepts, the images, the image of image, like a word is an image that goes along with the picture that my brain creates, that my brain is trying to make its best guess about what's going on outside of me. So there is some flow of energy that we call life. There's light, there's matter that's congealed into, or energy that's congealed into matter, and the light bounces off of that and hits my eyes, and my eye creates a picture. My brain creates a picture from the signals that are getting collected by the antenna, which is my eye. So the first thing is that the picture in my head, my mind tricks me into believing that's the same as this energy sitting outside of me, and it's not. It's just a copy. It's just an image that my mind has created. And then my mind wants to be able to label that and communicate it to somebody else, so I create a word.
Mm.
Or I create some meanings for some vibrations that we call a word. So who or what you think God is can't ever be who or what God is. If there is a God, well, how does that question even make sense? Is there a God?
Yeah. Mm.
You might as well ask, is there any actuality in life?
Mm.
Am I really here or not? Is this all really a dream? So this work is calling us to soften and open and allow and question, rather than come to these conclusions, rather than wrestle with these things and pin them down.
Mm. I want to ask a question, but it's going to take a minute to come around to it. On Michael Ryce's show yesterday, he mentioned the birth of a baby that had no brain, and how that child, the doctors suggested that the parents let it go. The parents didn't want to. The child grew and was healthy, but didn't have the kind of brain that we associate with our brain. I don't know what he had, but he evidently was a human being, as Michael said. And I was quite triggered with that, partly because I had an abortion at age 42 with a Downs baby. I was older, we had young teenage children by then, and I was very involved in a career, and I didn't want to have to go back and raise an infant that might not even be viable. We didn't know if she would live or die. You've heard this story. So I thought I would have been one of those parents to choose to not keep the child. But
And
this child,
and that would be okay. Here's the point. Judging is of the mind, it's of the intellect, of that tiny little limited space we've been talking about so far this whole show.
mm,
So your mind is going to the judgment,
yeah, that's
right?
true.
It happened, it unfolded, it was perfect just the way it was. And other people had babies and they found out they were going to be Downs, and they had the Down syndrome baby, and everything's fine there too. It, to get out of the judgment mode, right?
That's good. It's
Now,
part of,
now take the next step here
okay.
and look at what Dr. Michael Ryce was talking about. He wasn't
Okay.
talking about judging anybody. He was
Mm,
trying to make the point that what is fundamental, to use Christian Sundberg's words, what's fundamental here is not the brain,
yeah,
is not
now
the
you're getting to
physical
it.
body.
Right.
It's the essence. This is what Bruce Lipton in his studies came to that just rocked his world. He's a hard scientist, a cellular biologist looking through an electron microscope at human cells. And the theory at that point in time was that the nucleus of the cell was the brain of the cell. And that the primacy of DNA, meaning that whatever DNA comes together when a strip of DNA from mom comes and wraps itself around a strip of DNA from dad, then now you're just set, and whatever you turn out to be, whatever got set in that initial coupling, and that the DNA determines everything. But he's looking at an electron microscope and decides to take the nucleus out of the human cell, and the cell keeps thriving.
Yeah.
The cell keeps taking in nutrition and eliminating waste. The only thing it can't do is build new parts when they're worn out, because what's in the nucleus is just like the gonads or the building blocks. But the blueprint and the life force and the decision making is coming from outside the cell. And he found there's receptor sites on the cell for physical stimulation, but also for the mental energy of the individual. So the cell is receiving a signal from somewhere outside of itself. We have a consciousness that's connected to something other than our physical body. It's the same thing Bruce Lipton was talking about in his book, Biology of Belief, that Michael Ryce was trying to talk about yesterday in his show, that it's just a tool, right? The body is just a tool. The body is not who and what you are. The brain is just a tool. It's not the essence of who or what you are.
I remember we read early in Christian Sundberg's book that one of the conditions on his coming to Earth in a human body was that he would be intelligent, which means he would have the kind of brain that we've been overvaluing, I guess, here. And I don't fault him because he says he doesn't know anything. I would have done the same thing if I had a choice. I'd rather be on Earth with the best tools that I would need for life on this earth according to the culture that I was entering. But so where am I going with this? I forget where I was going with this, but it had to do with how can we know God as everything unless we are thinking it?
Well, that's the whole point. That's what you're trained to believe, that you have to think about something to have it be real. And yet, most of us have other experiences.
Can you hear me, Dr. Tim? You've frozen.
This for a lot of years in my career, I was young and strong and fit and
Dr.
tall.
Tim,
Yeah.
you froze for a half a minute or less. So
Okay.
go back a teeny bit.
All right. So we've talked about how in my career, I have been in these different jobs where I was young and strong and tall and fit, and people relied on me to help keep the peace and keep people safe.
Mm.
And all of the trainings were about don't think, just act, right?
Mm.
Don't get emotional. Don't take it personally if somebody swears at you or throws something at your head, and then take this action. And there are several of these every time I start talking about this, several incidents that flood into my mind over the years where I did something or a whole series of things that later people were asking me, how did you do that? And I have no idea, because it was done without thought.
Oh, yeah.
It was done with just this, what Krishnamurti would say, this flow of energy from the truth of life. I'm letting it act on me. I'm in the moment, and I'm not stepping back from it and judging it. I'm just letting the flow of life act on me. And then I act from that flow without all the judgment and interpretation and labels and everything else. It is not only possible, it's our natural state, right? You think a baby is thinking about its
Mm.
hunger? No. You think it's thinking about eliminating waste? No. It's just acting as these energies have this ebb and flow. And then over time, the human mind, the baby's mind, gets programmed to be thinking certain ways. Gets programmed with language. It gets programmed with definitions for words and body parts. It gets programmed with definitions for objects. And then it starts to get programmed with values for certain objects, right? So your pee-pee and your poo-poo is gross and yucky and bad, and we don't want that. And this beautiful ripe piece of fruit is lovely, and et cetera, et cetera. So we're constantly programmed in this way that's so specifically limited to the what you might call the more gross, heavy physical aspects of our existence. And yet most of us have had experiences over the years where we are tapped into other things than just the heavy, gross physical parts of our experience.
You know what? It's as if you're recarving the shape of the brain. I think I've thought of the brain as everything, including all of our experience, but you're talking about a brain that interprets and analyzes and categorizes and the other stuff. I've certainly, we've all experienced that flow of being not there while we're creating something. And then we come back and say, wow, 4 hours have passed. But we were there. It's the there-ness of the person that wasn't aware that it was there that's the kind of person we're trying to access, I guess, here.
Yes, yes, yes. Or we're pointing at with our words.
Mm.
And what we're talking about in many different ways is that we are not trained into accessing these other energies or these other abilities to perceive at different levels. I'd be willing to bet that if there's 10 different people who eventually listen to this hour's recording, there's one or two of those people who, when they were younger, they used to have perceptions that were not available to their adult counterparts or their older siblings, and the adult counterparts or older siblings generated fear
Mm.
or actively taught that child to stop paying attention to, stop perceiving, stop talking about this experience, whether it's seeing auras or hearing voices or seeing ghosts, etc.
Mm.
Probably been so pervasive on this planet that at least 1 out of every 10 people have had that experience. And they might have reached adulthood and been so completely forgotten it and pushed it down so strongly that they go to their grave not remembering.
You know, it's so interesting that saints are often considered aberrations or even crazy, or artists have sometimes people wonder whether they were mentally okay, like Van Gogh. They wondered if he was a schizophrenic. I think that's what it was. And I had a cousin who was in an institution from the age of about 20 with schizophrenia, and she had all kinds of visions. They were horrible visions. She suffered a lot. But there's something about a grid that they can pass through very quickly that we don't or can't. And she couldn't find her way back from there by any willpower or thought. It's so interesting, that whole area of illness and talent, brilliant artist talent, and so forth. I guess I'm taking you on a tangent, and I apologize for
Well,
that.
but no, it's not that much of a tangent, right? This is how do people interpret that experience?
Mm.
And in our culture, it gets interpreted as crazy and sick and dysfunctional.
Mm.
Whereas in a different culture, that person might have been paired up with the shaman or the
Mm-hmm.
witch doctor or the spiritual teacher and been guided through a process that uses more than just the five physical senses to tune into or align with or attune to
Mm-hmm.
those energies so that they ended up not being so negative and torturous.
Boy.
And
Mm.
then that person can actually become a spiritual teacher or just an individual who is much more spiritually attuned. I mean, think about it. I've interviewed this woman, Beatrice Birch, at least twice, maybe three times now for the On Your Mind podcast. And she was an art therapist, a particular type of art therapy that she was trained in. And she was working over in Europe. And after however many years she worked over there quite successfully, she came back to America and she went to work at a um, residential facility or a psychiatric hospital or whatever. And it's just human beings, right? Whether they're on one continent or another. But so another population of adult human beings, many with the same kinds of symptoms
Mm.
as they had over there. But when she was over in Europe, there's almost no medication.
Wow.
And when she came over to America, it's like everybody was on meds, multiple meds, and they're walking around in agony because of all the heavy effects of the meds, and eventually because of her personality and how much she was talking about the spiritual part of things and the soul and the creativity and the arts. They would come to her. I think she said 8 or 9 people came to her and begged her to help them get off the meds.
Wow.
And she wasn't a medical doctor and she didn't have that kind of authority and she couldn't. And what prompted her to go out on her own and create her own residential healing center was that a majority of those 8 or 9 people ended up taking their own lives.
Mm.
So you have to wonder if these medications are so effective and so powerful and they're so good for depression and good for anxiety. How are so many people committing suicide?
Mm.
How are so many people still increasingly filing for mental health disability year after year, even though we prescribe more of those drugs now than we ever did before? So
Mm.
it's it in Europe where they didn't view the people as sick and damaged and broken, they viewed them as going through a challenging adjustment in life, and or they viewed them as artistic, spiritually attuned, creative, whatever. They would help them through those episodes of what they were calling mental health challenges
Mm.
rather than saying, oh, you're schizophrenic, you're bipolar, you're this personality disorder, you're a combination of this personality disorder and type 1 bipolar, and et cetera. Instead of labeling people and putting them in boxes like that, in other places, people are assisted in going through turbulent times and they come out the other side more often than not.
Mm.
Whereas in our current setup, most often when people start taking anti-anxiety and antidepressant medications, they end up having many, many more relapses than they ever did before these medications were in were available.
Mm. Mm.
So the brain, the point you were trying to make is that what Michael Ryce was saying yesterday in his show is that the brain is just a tool. The brain is not your essence, and the brain isn't the seat of your soul, right? Your consciousness, your soul, your light, your spirit, whatever you want to call it, is not dependent upon your body for its existence.
Mm.
It may be at your current level of understanding, it may be dependent upon your body for the ability to experience and communicate in the physical realm, but these teachings are pointing us towards the actuality that that's not all there is to life. Thoughts?
Well, it's hardly connected. It just popped into my mind. The fact that so many people who get well probably get well because of the support. The woman named somebody Birch.
Beatrice Birch, yep.
Beatrice, yeah, provided an honoring of the person as a whole person, even when they might be looked at in our culture as an unwhole person. But taken even further away, I was just thinking about what does it mean to be a therapist? When I see a client, I hope I'm the kind of person who is a healing presence without knowing what to do or without being able to understand what's really going on. But just the simple presence of a listening person provides a healing environment. And
exactly. Exactly. I did an interview with Dr. Ross Ellenhorn back in January. It was published on the On Your Mind podcast. That's his whole thing, is that all these different theories, all these different styles of therapy, the more you research them, the more you find out the one thing they all have in common is a loving, supportive connection with the therapist.
Right.
And that there's no particular therapy style or technique or trick that produces radically better results than any other when they're outside of that loving, therapeutic, empathic, compassionate relationship.
And what we're talking about is something that has nothing to do with the brain, although you can decide to be that way. But once you are that way, your mind isn't particularly involved. You're just present.
Yep.
Woo.
Yes, indeed.
You know, Dr. Tim, as you know, I've been going through these journals from way back, and now I'm well into the pandemic time. And the center of my day, I would get up very early, do my own work, then I'd stop everything and listen to the radio show. And that provided this environment of mutual support and encouragement, plus lots of information, but it had a function beyond anything we were reading. I realized that as I go through my journals, because at first I was taking a ton of notes, writing down everything. And then I don't take notes. Once in a while, I'll take a note because it just blows my mind, but it's settled into this state. So the radio show might want to get a lot of tools across, but it's functioning as something else too, which is really good.
Yeah, it's that support, connection, community, grounding. It's energetic resonance. You know, the old adage, if two or more are gathered in my name, right? There is love. There's the idea there's always more going on here than you're consciously aware of. So I realize we're down to our last minute. So I thank you very much, as always, for your questions, comments, and participation.
You were with that woman. Did she join?
I will remind us all that we come from love. We're made of the stuff we call love. We actually are love, and everything else is false. There will be a support group tonight. All the information you'd need to join us is on the MindShiftersAcademy.org website.